I'm gonna say something pretty controversial. Terraria pre-hard mode holds the game back from being great. I said it. Now, a lot of people consider Terraria to be a great game, and I think the main reason why is because of the transition from pre-hard mode to hard mode. It makes it's just so unique. You never experience games like that where you have stuff and you feel OP and you think you're in the end game and you go straight into basically hard mode and you just struggle and all the OP gear you had is now weak. It is such a great idea and it's implemented greatly, and it's why I think people love this game. And also hard mode is just a lot of fun. It's just way better. But pre-hard mode is just, it feels kind of like stupid. Now, on your first playthrough, pre-hard mode is great. I mean, if you're getting used to all the things, it's gonna be great. Even on your second playthrough, okay, it's pretty reasonable. I think the problem comes with replayability is that after your second playthrough, that's when it starts getting dull and very boring. And I know that's not really an issue necessarily of the game fully, and more of it's just not it just stopped replaying, I guess. But like that's not really how that works. I mean, I love replaying the game; it's a great thing. So I don't know. Anyways, let's just get to the points. So the first point I'm going to start off with, is actually kind of a minor one, but it's still something I want to talk about, which is classes. I think that the class progression is really rough for some of the classes. For example, Mage. There's no real easy start to Mage. In fact, you're most likely going to be stuck playing another class before you can actually get a foothold into Mage, which I think is kind of stupid. Like, it just doesn't make sense. Like, the armor you need is found by materials that are just incredibly annoying to get if you're trying to play Mage with which is a problem because you don't have mage gear yet, so you're not really strong. And most of the mage weapons are pretty hard to get and take time to get early game. And Summoner has the same issue where the summons are very, very weak, and the Snapthorn was really kind of annoying to get. So you end up playing different classes before you can get to it, which it's really not that big of a deal, I guess, but it's like, I just feel like Ranger and Melee are just kind of like polished in the sense that they have a sense of progression from the get-go, and these other classes are kind of like hard to get started in, but once you get your foothold into it, it's pretty nice. And on the topic of that, we might as well talk about how the weapons are very simplistic. When you compare most weapons to hard mode variants of weapons, it's pretty noticeable which ones are more boring. It's not even about the damage. The damage is pretty balanced and sometimes even pretty good. That's not the issue. The issue is how boring the weapons are. I mean, if you look at Ranger, for example, all of the bows basically do the same thing. And you might think, okay, well, all the bows in the game do the same thing. No, that's not true at all. If you look at hard mode, there's multiple bows that shoot arrows in different, unique ways. Whereas in pre-hard mode, it's all just kind of, well, here's one arrow that comes out of a bow in the same velocity, basically. Not interesting. Even for swords, most of the swords are pretty generic in the sense that they just swing. When you look at later game swords, they shoot projectiles and have all these unique properties. I mean, even it's just, if you look at every class, it's basically that way. It's just very simplistic and bland, which makes the experience a lot more bland, because I think part of the thing that makes this game feel so good is the sense of power and like fun you get from those cool weapons, which really only show up in hard mode. Great example of this is basically any Duke Fishron weapon or even Empress or Light weapon, which just have tremendous power and feel just amazing. Like, I don't know what else to say, dude. And now comes the pre-boss. Alright, I had to say it. I had to talk about pre-boss. Pre-boss is by far the worst part of this entire pre-hard mode experience. Like, it drags the entire game down. Now, I get there has to be a pre-boss, but it's so boring. You mine at such slow paces, and you basically are stuck going in caves, trying not to die with your minimal gear, mining at the pace of a snail, and it just drags on for way too long, and it's really annoying to mine. And the other thing is you also have to rely on RNG. So, for example, if you want to fight your first boss, you most likely are going to want Hermes boots. And oh my god, when I tell you that Hermes boots is a hit or miss for me, is not a lie. Like, sometimes you'll get Hermes boots immediately, and sometimes you'll get these things like never. I mean, I've had playthroughs where it's like 8 hours of gameplay and I can't find Hermes boots. I've been searching caves all the time, and I still can't find it. The other thing that drags it down is also the life crystal grind, because especially with other players, it just becomes tedious to get them. And solo it's not that bad, but it's still annoying because they're kind of rare. So you're just stuck with a low amount of life, and it's like, oh, that's great. And I get that makes sense, because obviously if you start with a higher amount of life, then everything would just be easy. But I do feel like they need to be a little more common, because it's kind of rare to get them. And then, of course, you have the bosses. Now, the bosses aren't horrible, but none of the bosses from pre-hard mode particularly stand out as great, except for Wall Flesh and Skeletron, in my opinion. Now, this is all opinion right here, but I mean, Eye of Cthulhu's pretty generic and honestly not that exciting. Brain of Cthulhu's okay, but he's kind of easy, and Eater of Worlds is just Eater of Worlds. I mean, it's not that exciting either. Queen Bee, I mean, it's kind of generic. I mean, I think the problem with most of the bosses is they're very simplistic. And, of course, they're going to be hard for someone who's new to the game, but once you've played the game once or twice, you're going to think that too. They're pretty simplistic compared to hard mode variants, which makes sense. Again, pre-hard mode is basically supposed to be easier because it's preparing you for the challenges that await, and you need to get your foothold in the game. So I get that this is why this exists, and why, everything's simplistic and boring and bland, but it kind of takes away from the game. Now, if we're going to talk about why pre-hard mode is bad, why not talk about what hard mode does correctly? Well, what hard mode does correctly is quite simple. It makes everything a lot more challenging in a fun, unique way. It also has a lot of moments in progression that have very, very OP weapons, which is not something you see often besides like the Knight's Edge from pre-hard mode, which that thing is broken. And it makes the fun aspect go through the roof when you carry OP weapons and cool unique weapons. But the bosses are phenomenal, in my opinion. I mean, there's really not many bosses I can name in hard mode that I don't like. Yeah, sure, they could be difficult, but they're not unlikable to fight. I mean, great example is the mechanical bosses. They are basically pre-hard mode bosses, but harder, and they're done so much better, and they look cooler, they attack in cooler ways, and overall it's more fun to fight them than such things like, oh, Eye of Cthulhu. No, not that interesting. So, yeah, that's my take on pre-hard mode. It causes me to not like the game. I hate playing new playthroughs because of it. I hate being stuck in pre-hard mode. It's very frustrating. And with that, hope you enjoyed, and goodbye.